Look at the heart of Paris from above. L'île de la Cité, the island where Paris was born, is shaped like a boat, a ship sailing west on the Seine. At its prow stands Notre-Dame. At its center, le Palais de Justice. For over 2,000 years, this boat-shaped island has been the sacred center of the city. Now consider the city's coat of arms, a ship on waves. Its motto, Fluctuat nec mangitur, she's battered by the waves, but does not sink. And consider the city's name. In ancient Egyptian, Per means house or temple. Isis was the greatest goddess of the ancient world, goddess of magic, of resurrection, of navigation. Per-Isis would be the house of Isis. Paris. This is not mainstream etymology. Linguists will tell you the Parisii were a Celtic tribe and that their name's meaning is lost. But for over 1,000 years, Parisians themselves believed their city was named for Isis. Medieval manuscripts show her arriving by boat. Historians in 1532 reported a statue of Isis near Saint-Germain-des-Prés. In 1811, Napoleon, who had developed Egyptomania after his Egyptian campaign, was so convinced of the connection that he redesigned Paris' coat of arms. He placed the goddess Isis at the prow of the ship, sailing towards her sacred star, Sirius. A couple centuries later, in 2021, a French Egyptologist discovered 7 hidden messages on the Luxor Obelisk at Place de la Concorde, messages designed to be read by nobles arriving by boat. The obelisk, that was built for boat-arriving viewers, now stands in the city whose name may mean House of Isis, whose symbol is a boat, whose founding goddess was the goddess of navigation. Welcome to Parisii, per Isis. Welcome to the city that remembers her name. In 52 BCE, Julius Caesar's legions conquered a town he called Lutetia, a town of the Parisii, located on an island on the river Seine. The Parisii, a Celtic tribe, yet their name doesn't sound Celtic. By the reign of Caligula, in 38 CE, Isis worship was officially sanctioned throughout the empire. Her cult spread to every corner. Gaul, Britain, Germany. Temples rose along trade routes and rivers. The Seine was a major artery of Roman commerce, and the Parisii were boatmen, whose guild would dominate Paris for 1,000 years. Their monument, Le Pilier des Nautes, found beneath Notre-Dame in 1711, shows Roman and Gallic gods together. Isis was the goddess of navigation. Her sacred festival, the Navigium Isidis, celebrated the opening of the sailing season, where devotees launched decorated ships in her honor. A boatman's tribe, a river city, a goddess of navigation. The 9th century monk, Abbon of Saint-Germain, has been writing about Viking invasions and called the city, formerly Lutece, since you took your name from Asia. The world calls you Paris, as if it said quasi per ici, similar to Asia. In 1532, historian Gilles Corrozet wrote that near Saint-Germain-des-Prés there was a temple dedicated to an idol of the goddess Isis, and that several people of his time have seen the statue. In 1773, another historian claimed that in the heart of Paris there was the temple of Isis, on whose ruins the Notre-Dame church was raised. Notre-Dame, Our Lady, built on the ruins of the temple of the original Lady of Paris. Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt in 1798. He brought 167 scholars with him. They measured the pyramids, catalogued the temples, and discovered the Rosetta Stone. When Napoleon returned to France, he brought Egyptomania, a fascination with ancient Egypt that would reshape Paris. The Egyptian campaign also convinced Napoleon of something the medievals had claimed, that Paris and Isis were connected. On January the 29th, in 1811, Napoleon issued Latter's patent redesigning Paris's coats of arms. The traditional fleur-de-lis were replaced with three golden bees, and at the prow of the ship that had always symbolized Paris, he placed Isis herself, gazing forward. Above the ship, a star, Sirius. In Egyptian mythology, Sirius was sacred to Isis. Its first appearance in the dawn sky announced the flooding of the Nile, the rebirth of the land, and the promise of life. The Egyptians called it Sabdet. The Greeks called it Sotis. They knew it as the Star of Isis. And Napoleon's coat of arms showed Isis on a sacred ship. The Bourbon Restoration removed Isis in 1817. But for 6 years, the connection between Paris and Isis was official. The city's coat of arms declared what the contemporaneous had always believed. Paris was the house of Isis. The ship remains on Paris's coat of arms to this day. The star is gone, Isis is gone, but the boat ship-like island still floats on the Seine. And Notre Dame still stands where the temple of Isis may once have stood. In the center of Place de la Concorde stands the oldest monument in Paris, the Luxor Obelisk, 3,300 years old. Carved for Pharaoh Ramses II in the 13th century BCE, it once stood at the entrance to the Temple of Amun at Luxor, beside its twin. In 1830, the Ottoman Viceroy of Egypt gifted both obelisks to France. An alleged trip of 6 years, only one made the journey. On October 25th, in 1836, watched by 2,000 Parisians and King Louis-Philippe himself, the obelisk was raised at Place de la Concorde. The engineer Apollinaire Lebas stood in its shadow during the maneuver. If it fell, he had vowed not to survive. For nearly 2 centuries, scholars have studied the hieroglyphs, the names and titles of Ramses II, prayers to Amun, declarations of divine power. And then came 2021. Jean-Guillaume Olette-Pelletier, an Egyptologist at La Sorbonne, had spent the pandemic lockdowns walking to the obelisk and reading its inscriptions. And he noticed something strange. The direction of certain hieroglyphs pointed toward the entrance of the Luxor temple, but that entrance was 3,000 miles away. When scaffolding went up for pre-Olympic restoration, Olette-Pelletier received permission to climb. He became the first expert to reach the top since Champollion himself. And what he found changed everything. 7 crypto-hieroglyphs, hidden messages, carved into the stone, readable only from specific angles, only by those who knew the code. One of the messages discovered was designed to be read from a 45-degree angle by nobles arriving by boat on the Nile during the Optet festival. The obelisk was built to speak to people arriving by boat. The obelisk in Paris was the western obelisk at Luxor. Its twin, still standing in Egypt, was the eastern obelisk. The eastern obelisk was the rising sun, while the western obelisk was the setting sun. The obelisk of the rising sun traveled west to the city of the setting sun. But something else happened when the obelisk was installed, something the engineers may not have fully understood. The obelisk was rotated 90 degrees. The face that once looked toward the Nile, the face designed to be read by nobles arriving by boat, now faces north. A plaque at its base reads cryptically, Au levant de Thèbes surgit à Paris, le nord, which means what is in the east at Thebes is now in the north, in Paris. But La Seine flows roughly east-west past Place de la Concorde. The north-facing side of the obelisk now looks toward the river. The hidden messages meant for boat-arriving viewers now faced La Seine, the river of the boatmen tribe, in the city that may be named for the goddess of navigation. And 800 meters downstream, the boat-shaped Île de la Cité floats on the water, its prow pointing west towards the obelisk, the setting sun. Ramses built an obelisk to speak to those arriving by sacred boat. And more than 3,000 years later, it stands in the house of Isis, the goddess of sacred boats. The Egyptians believed in patterns, in cosmic alignments, in the gods speaking through stone. So what would they make of this? Olette-Pelletier found 7 crypto-hieroglyphs on the obelisks for faces. On the face that once looked toward the Nile, Ramses appears wearing the pshent, the double crown of the Upper and Lower Egypt. That's a message of absolute power, visible only from the water. On another face, bull horns are hidden in Ramses' crown. They form the word Ka, which means vital force and life energy. Combined with other symbols, it reads, Happy is the K-force of Amun. And beneath an image of the god Amun, an offering table. The complete phrase would be an offering that the king gives to the god Amun. These were messages within messages. The ordinary hieroglyphs proclaim Ramses' glory to anyone who could read. Yet the crypto-hieroglyphs spoke only to the initiated, those who understood the sacred code. And one layer deeper, the messages only revealed themselves to those arriving in the sacred manner, by boat, at the sacred time, during the Optet festival, when the god Amun traveled by river from Karnak to Luxor. The obelisk was a filter. It showed different truths to different viewers. The masses saw stone. The educated saw hieroglyphs. The initiated saw hidden messages. And now it stands in Paris, in the house of Isis, in the city of the sacred boat, where the goddess of navigation once had her temple. So is Paris named after Isis? Linguists say probably not. The Parisii were Celtic, and their name's origin is uncertain. The Parisii etymology is folk tradition, medieval speculation, but here is what is certain. Isis was worshipped in Roman Paris. Temple stood in her name. A statue of her survived into the 16th century. The medieval people once believed the connection so firmly that they wrote it into history. Napoleon believed it so firmly that he put Isis on the city's coat of arms. And the obelisk, built to speak to sacred boats, stands in the city whose symbol is a boat, whose heart is a boat-shaped island, whose major saint is Notre Dame, Our Lady, whose original lady may have been the goddess herself. Coincidence is the word we use when we don't understand the pattern. But the Egyptians understood patterns. They built monuments that spoke across millennia. They encoded messages that waited 3,000 years to be read. And what if Paris is one of those messages? A city founded by boatmen on a boat-shaped island, maybe named after the goddess of navigation, and marked, certainly, by an obelisk that was built to speak to those who arrived by water. The boat sails on, the goddess remembers, and in the center of Paris, a 3,000 years old stone still speaks to those who know how to listen. Paris, the house of Isis.